Hello, this is Andy Mangum at Brookhaven College, and I thought I would take some time to explain my PowerPoint grading criteria. The first criterion is that you should have 3 slides of supporting material. Just a reminder to you that a speech can contain 3 types of content: organizational content, propositional content, and supportive or illustrative content. Organizational content are things like giving your audience an indication of where you're headed. Propositional content is when you display a claim that you're making. For instance, I'm making the claim that speakers should create PowerPoint slides with presentational context in mind. This is a claim. That is a proposition I want my audience to believe. Claims can be claims of fact, claims of value, or claims of policy. This happens to be a policy or behavioral claim. And then you can have supportive content, the content that you give with this information. So this is my organizational example, 3 slides with supporting material. Here's an example of a piece of supporting material. This is statistical information that's given about youth concerns from high school students currently, and then also recent graduates. And we're showing how students who recently graduated from high school increase in their concern about financial matters. But this is just, you need 3 types of slides, three different slides at least in your presentation that has supportive material, not just organizational or propositional. The organizational, propositional are great. I encourage you to use them, but you need at least 3 situations where you're showing me the supporting material that you're using for your speech. Some reminders that the types of supporting material that you can use are definitions, quotations, examples, statistics, images, and diagrams. All right, so that's first criterion. Remember that you need to have at least 3 slides that are devoted specifically to supporting material. Second is that you should have only 1 slide per picture per slide, except for comparison purposes. So here's an example of comparison. I'm comparing 2 dots of antibiotics, one with antibiotic-sensitive bacteria and one with antibiotic-resistant bacteria. I'm comparing these 2 pictures. Too often, however, students will try to cram a lot of pictures on one slide, and it just gets to be confusing. For example, here is all of the pictures from a particular slideshow that I put together, all crammed on to one. And you can see how muddled that becomes. So you should have 1 picture per slide, only 1 picture per slide. You don't have to have a picture on each slide, but if you're having a picture on each slide, you should only have 1. A third criterion is that you should have few complete sentences. When you push a lot of complete sentences onto a slide or into your PowerPoint presentation, several things happen. One of the things that happens is that you end up having to say more than you want to at one time. You end up having to read too much, and it cuts down on your effectiveness. It also then gives your information overload. So here's a good example of a good slide. It's a quotation by me. It says, "Quotation is a gift." You can see how powerful that is in its simplicity. The audience can easily read that but not get distracted. If I go the extreme other end of the spectrum, though, you can see how this looks. A quotation is a gift that can be nullified through an extension of the quotation that exceeds the bounds of orality and fits the originator's written style. Such quotations might be better offered as summarized statements. Speakers should keep in mind that they should quote somebody when the person has said it better than they can say it themselves. Additionally, the presentation should be limited to 1 idea per slide. So you can see here, this is just too many complete sentences. I had to read that rather than being able to relate my information to my audience, and it just gets to be overload. All right, so keep in mind just, few complete sentences. Everything that you show, you have to say. Fourth criterion is that your graphics should be there for meaning, not decoration. So this is an example I use quite often. A student was doing a speech on changing your own oil. He had a picture of a car with its hood open up. I got distracted by that because I kept thinking, well, is that an international sign of distress? And is there a family there? And I started looking at the picture a little more closely. It looks like it's a fair, and I imagine that's a concession stand in the back, and I suspect they're selling funnel cake. And you can see where my brain starts going. And this happens a lot, where speakers will decide that their presentation doesn't look good enough just with text or just with the information they're providing. They try to spice it up a little bit by adding a bunch of pictures, and in the end what they end up doing is creating a story for their audience to think about that's other than what they're saying at the time. By contrast, in this picture, the student put a picture of the oil cap and showed us that on the oil cap there is the oil grade that they are using in the oil in the car. Now, that's a very helpful example of a use of picture, because that gives me some information. So you want to make sure that your pictures are there for supportive material, that you're going to talk about them, that you're going to use them as either examples or illustrations of what you're talking about, that they're not just there to dress up your presentation. I tell my students frequently, you are the eye candy. So you don't want to throw pictures up there that your audience is going to get distracted by. Fifth criterion, very important, is that source citation is on the slide. By that we mean every picture that you use has to have the source citation. You'll notice down there at the bottom I have the source citation as Dr. Graham Beard's, and that's taken from Wikimedia Commons. Wikimedia Commons is a open source collection of pictures. I find it very helpful because they give us high density pictures that show up well in presentations. So make sure every picture has a source citation, just like that one down there at the bottom. Not a big fan of the source citation slide at the end of the presentation where all of the sources are cited like they would be in a research paper. Would much prefer that you just cite on your way through. Anyway, same thing's true of statistical data, source citation of statistical data. Again, my youth report of financial concerns slide, you notice down there at the bottom and highlighted in yellow where I got that information. That's a true statistic, by the way. All right, number 7 criterion, bulleted list for list purposes. Should say purposes, not purpose. But what we mean by that is so often what happens is students let PowerPoint think for them. Default slide is a bulleted list. This is a bulleted list. And so they use a bulleted list to create a confusing series of ideas as a list. This is a list, or it looks like a list, but really what it is a series of ideas. Edward Tufte, who taught at MIT for a while, has written about the cognitive style of PowerPoint and is particularly critical of this feature of PowerPoint, that it directs speakers to use bulleted lists too often, and they end up giving information overload on the slides and not pulling out information effectively. Normally what happens then is that speakers are using the PowerPoint as their speaker notes instead of using it as a visual aid. And this also contributes to the click and write syndrome, where people end up with notes from the presentation that they don't understand because it was just a series of ideas. Here's a contrasting slide that gives an exact list. Act fast is a response technique for detecting stroke. So fast is the list. These are the signs of whether a person is having a stroke. And they tell you to look at the face and ask the person to smile, see if their smile is drooping somewhat. Ask them to raise their arms, both arms, and if one arm drifts, that can be a sign of a stroke. Ask them to say something simple, and if their speech is slurred or strange, that could be a sign of a stroke. And then they remind you that time is of essence, that they should call 911 immediately. This is a discrete list. And so what I would want my speakers to do is to reserve bulleted lists for list purposes, for things that need to belong together. Otherwise, you can break apart those ideas if you really want them on a slide, and you can break them apart onto separate slides. the cost of adding a slide to a presentation is $0.00. So you should express one idea per slide and not try to cram everything onto a single slide. All right, my 8th criterion is that you should have monochromatic backgrounds. That is, that you should have single color backgrounds. I know that looks boring. I know that PowerPoint gives you all these cute, pretty, beautiful, amazing backgrounds to choose from. And if you are creating a document or a kiosk display, I would agree with you that you should use them. But for speech purposes, I think monochromatic backgrounds are the best. I know it makes it look boring, but still, you are the eye candy. The problem with the designs that they give you, one of them is that you end up with usable slide space that gets taken up by the design. Notice that a full quarter of this slide is consumed by the design because you're not going to go over there to the right and add things on there. Also, fancy backgrounds are like pictures for decorations. They can be distracting. You can see the gradation here. It just gets to be too much. People start paying attention to what you've got on the screen rather than what you're trying to say with the screen. Criteria number 9 is the 6x6 rule, very important. That means a maximum of 6 words across and a maximum of 6 lines down. Notice that does not mean a maximum of 36 words. You can have far less than 36 words and still violate the 6x6 rule. Here's a violation going down. You'll notice that I have 8 lines of text going down. That's too many. As well, you can have a violation going across. Here I have 10 words going across. 6x6 means a maximum of 6 words across and a maximum of 6 lines down. If you have to break the concept apart into 2 slides, it's better to do that than to violate the 6x6 rule. Right. Criteria number 10 is that your text and your background should have contrasting colors. Sometimes things look great on the computer screen, and then when they get projected in the classroom or wherever, they bleed out. Here's a good example, and actually it doesn't look that great on the computer screen, but just a reminder to you that subtle differences might show up on your high-definition computer screen that once you project them with an LCD projector actually go away. And this is a good example where that middle text where the screen background gets brighter loses the red text in the middle. Criteria number 11 is very important. Avoid a red-green combination. For whatever reason, there are certain people who find that color combination nauseating. I happen to be one of them. I am not alone. Criteria number 12 is that text size should be sufficient for the size of the room. My instructions to people usually is to put your slide up on your computer screen, and then depending on how big your computer screen is, if it's a laptop screen, step back 6 to 12 feet. Maybe if it's a larger monitor, you go to the other side of the room. But you should be able to read your text from a distance on the computer screen. Ideally, you would put it up in the context where you're going to use it. So if it's on a computer screen in a small conference room, you would put it up on the TV monitor, and you would use it in the room. Get as far away from it as you possibly can. See if you can read all of the text. If you're using a projector, same thing. You want to make sure that the text size is sufficient. Do not trust yourself sitting in front of your computer and looking at the text. You can see very small things when you're that close up. You want to get a distance on it and make sure that it's still sufficient for the size of the room. Last criterion is that you use legible fonts. Some examples of illegible fonts that I have seen students use in the past. Things that are exceptionally thin. I couldn't actually find one that was thin as I have seen on presentations before. Really complicated cursive or ornamental fonts, not the best things in the world. And then all caps. In general, you should avoid all caps. It has to do with the way our brains and our eyes process the shape of words, but we are geared to read words more quickly if they are in initial caps or lowercase than we are if they are in all caps. Our eyes see all caps as rectangles, and we don't necessarily process That means we have to read every letter, and it becomes difficult. So those are my 13 criteria, and I hope that helps you as you're preparing your own speeches for your presentations for your speeches. Good luck.